Purpose of the presentation, again, statutorily, this was created by the 122nd General Assembly in 1997 that basically has a district present these twice. We have to have these submitted to the State Department of Education by October 31st of each year and by May 31st of each year as well. You can do updates weekly if you want to, but statutorily, they have to happen these 2 times a year. And these do need to be board approved because it's really the board's forecast, not the treasurer's forecast. So we're all on the same page. It's the board's forecast.
Yeah, we hear you, Bart.
Okay. What I tried to do is I tried to keep this presentation very similar to the last several I've done so that there's some consistency, and I tried to break it out. I know some of these you can see, some you can't. I know the board has them in front of you. I'm not sure the audience can see those. What this page here, just visually, this is just the revenue. What I tried to highlight in the sort of, I don't know if it's pink or what color that is on the screen, those are the 2 state, the public utility personal property and the property tax allocation lines that we receive. The ones in the middle that are kind of gray is the unrestricted grants and aid, that's state foundation. The restricted grants and aid is also state foundation, but they're restricted to specific funds. So I try to highlight where the big dollars come from. The very top line is the general property tax. That comes from our citizens who graciously give us funds to do what we need to do. One of the things I will draw your attention, and I'll point it out later, is on their fiscal year 18, you'll see that it's a lot less. Let's see if I can. That didn't work. Let's see if this works. You'll see that for the audience, it's this column right here. And for you guys, it's right here. Our general property tax actually is going to go to 97.1 million. In 17, it's 103. The reason you see that is the levy comes off in fiscal year 17. You lose half of it in fiscal year 17 because fiscal year 17 ends June 31st of 17. You're going to lose half of your income real estate in 17, or excuse me, in 18. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. In 18. You receive it in all of calendar year. Fiscal year 18 ends June 31st of 18, so you lose half of it, and then so you see in fiscal year 19, you lose all of that. We cannot show as treasurers that levy will be renewed, so we have to show it as coming off. So this, and I'll show these a little different as well. So that's sort of the summary for the revenue, and then I took them individually. Individually, this is the public utility property tax. If you remember, this district used to receive roughly $5.4 million in addition to what you see up there because of the public utility personal. We lost that. Okay, so now you see $2.3 million. That used to be an additional 5.4. The property tax allocation, again, in the fiscal year 18 and 19, the reason you see a decrease is because when you lose property tax, you also lose homestead rollback money that's associated with that property tax on that line. One of the things I'll briefly mention is if we do approve that new levy, the emergency levy, if you renew that, it's my understanding the homestead rollback, even though the law has changed, still would be collected on this levy because it was passed prior to the law being changed. That's one advantage to renewing this levy is you save the taxpayers roughly 14%. The state will still pay that on the taxpayer's behalf. But we show it up here as just as a decrease because that money is being eliminated. Under this one, this is state foundation. Roughly, we receive 37.9% of the state's per pupil funding. It's expected to grow to 40.8. This means roughly we receive of the $5,800 per pupil. As a district, we receive roughly $2,200 per student from the state. That's the share that they give us because of our local wealth. In other words, they don't give us the full $5,800. They only give us the $2,200. Okay. The modeling casino that we show there actually is just a reminder. We received that last year, the $51 per student. It's in the forecast each year just to show us that we are showing it in each of the this year and the next 4 years in the forecast. We just show that so that you know that that's part of it. It's not an increase every year in that amount. This sheet here, I know you can't see it. I figure when you download it, you might be able to see it. This is just a state funding formula. You know, it changed away from having a student count in October. You got so much per student for every person that was here enrolled the first week of October. Now it's based on your district median taxpayer, your valuation per pupil, and how you relate to what the state's doing in state median average or income and state median valuation. So depending on how each district does in comparison to the state average, you go up funds or down funds. So where it used to be, if you had 10 kids less kids this year, and theoretically you would lose 5,800 per student. Now if you lose funding and you become either wealthier than the state average or less wealthier than the state average, that money is times every kid in your district. It's not just on those kids that you either went up or down. So they changed the formula. So what this means for us is when they changed this 2 years ago, we were on what was called a guarantee district. In other words, we were always guaranteeing what we got the year before. When they changed this funding formula, what they did is they said, listen, we're going to add more money to the coffers, and if we owe you money, we're actually going to let you go up whatever we owe you, but we're going to cap you 6.5%. That was last fiscal year. This year they said, okay, we have more money. We're going to allow you to, instead of paying you everything we owe you, we're going to allow you to go up another 10% of what we owe you. So, and I know this is a little fuzzy, for 2015, even though we went up 6.5% last year and 10% this year, they still owe us $8 million per year. So if they keep doing it, which is nice, if they in our forecast we allocated or we assume a 1.5% increase in state aid each year. It's conservative. I've heard some people say, well, they might give you 5% this year. Okay, awesome. Our forecast will improve if they do. We only put 1.5% in there. We don't know if they're going to or not. So it is conservative. They owe us $8 million. So if they increase it to 5, then it'll eat into that $8 million. You can see that through well, you probably can't because it's blurry, but on your sheets here, in 2019, they're still projected to owe us $10.2 million at that 1.5% increase each year. So if we get just like I said, if the state goes up 3%, we see more money. 4%, we see more money. So just so you know, in a forecast, we're assuming 1.5%. This slide here is the actual state foundation. You can see in 2015, which for you guys, I don't know why that light's not working. 2015 is the fiscal year we're in. That's the current year. We're projected to receive $37.3 million this year. And then you can see the column to the left of it in 2014, we got 34.4 last year. So you can see the difference. The restricted, again, is funds that have to be specific for those funds. It's typically, so I'm looking for, what's the word? Vocational programs. It's vocational programs.
Vocational, yeah. Perkins.
Yes.
Perkins, Carl Perkins.
Well, we get some Perkins. That's its own fund.
Much.
That's its own fund. This is general fund.
Yeah.
Okay. Other revenue is the all operating expenditures. We represents a 3.9% of the district's revenue. One of the reasons you see an increase from 6.1 million in 14 to 6.4, one of the things that we're doing a little different in this district, we can go after what's called catastrophic cost reimbursement. We have to spend the first, I think it's $29,000 per special needs student. Anything we spend over that, we can apply to the state for reimbursement. And we would only get reimbursement of whatever our foundation level is. So back here, if it was 39%, for every $100, we're only going to get 39 back. So, but one of the things we did last year is I worked with a person who's doing that project and sort of added some things that we could do that we really haven't been doing. We generated $294,000 more this year than we did last year because of changing how we were doing things. And so we're working, my goal is to get really another ultimately, I'd like to have $1 million. We got $295,000 last year. My goal is, in comparison, Dublin gets about $900,000 in that fund. Some of the other districts behind us get $89,000 to $100,000. I think it's just one of those things that people they don't think they're going to hit, and it's a lot of work to get that. But anyway, the reason you see the $325,000 increase in fiscal year 15 over 14 was because of that catastrophic revenue that we received.
Is that specifically special needs?
Specifically special needs.
Thank you.
Right, and so part of the problem is if you build a brand new building, you can divide all those costs by the students and you can take so much there's a lot of calculations involved. It's a lot of work. And so we're trying to do a lot more of that to get those dollars.
Thank you.
Okay. This was just forecasted. You can see the differences, what was forecasted versus what actually came in. And when I say forecasted, when we did this forecast in May 28th of 2014, all this comparison is this is what was on the forecast in May as a projection, and then in 1016 you can see what the differences are. So, next one. This, again, to start with, this is the expenditures for the district. It goes anywhere from personal services to transfers, which I'll get to the turf one here in a minute. One of the things I thought was interesting, well, let me go to the next page. These are the assumptions for personal services. This is all salaries for the district. One of the things on here, an increase of certified staff, we put in here a $450,000 allowance for 10 staff members each year to be hired if needed be. Could be teachers, could be custodial. The number came, I think, from a master's in 5 times 10. That's where the number came from, the $450,000. So if you hired a custodian or not food service or their own funds, an aide, a teacher, a bus driver, whatever, it eats into that $450,000. So whatever Dr. Kellogg has planned, if we need to add additional staff or whatever, we've allocated $450,000 in each year of the forecast for those additional staff members. So that's where that number comes from.
Yeah, it's important to note that those are not positions that have been identified
That's
as
correct.
of yet. That is, it's put there for us to access if we do find that we need to add personnel as we go along. And it's important to consider when we look at that number as we go forward, we will need to be weighing that number as regards additional restorations that we may wish to make from previous cuts, in addition to changes in delivery systems that we may wish to implement.
Now, do we take into account their benefits in that, everything?
In the
All
5-year
expenses?
Well, in the 5-year forecast, when we load them in the 3.01 line,
Yeah.
3.02 calculates any benefits on that. So it's automatically on the next line. So
Okay.
this is salary only under this line, but if there's benefits associated with it, it'll be on the next line of the forecast.
Because
So,
it
but it's
calculates
not-
based on net head count. Sorry to interrupt, Dr. French, because it calculates based on net head count?
On the head count?
It based on the total salary. It
On the total
assumes there's
salary.
about a 16% benefit. You've got Medicare, workers' comp, retirements.
Right, but on top of that 450,000, it's
That's-
going to cost us 16%.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
The next line.
That's correct.
I know,
Yeah.
but we need to keep that in mind, that we're also expending more than the 450,000.
That's correct. You're right.
Just real quick, an example of where we used those dollars last year were those middle school teachers you saw today, because that was a program expansion at the middle grades
Right.
to take away some of the study hall time and add programming, and so some of that 450,000 was used. Now, what we had internal applicants for those positions, they moved over, and we hired, when we filled their previous positions with people lower in the salary scale in that BA0 area. So that's how that worked.
Yeah, I understand that's what they were hired under, but I just want to bring out the point that it's, in addition, it costs us more than what, if we spend.
If we
spend the full
Right,
450.
it's not appropriated, it's
We may
allocated
not.
on the 5-year
Right,
forecast.
Right.
So
I
when we did our appropriations, it's not part of the appropriations.
Sure.
It's just allocated in the 5-year
Gotcha.
forecast. The other section I have up on there about those 750,000, we actually paid 750,000 less in severance in this fiscal year than we did last year. So we made the adjustment on that line. The 1.8 million was the difference between the retirements the prior year versus the hiring of the new staff the next year. The first year you do that's kind of a wash because you're paying severances out, but the second year you've paid that off, so any savings you have, because you have a less, the salary of a staff member is less than you had than a veterans teacher. So we actually did an adjustment of $1.8 million to true that up. Okay. This is just a line here that shows the actual and personal service. The line above it just shows what the salaries are. So for you guys back here, that's the line right there of the salaries. This is the line here for the board up here. One of the things that's interesting, under 2015, you see $81.6 million for salary. I went back and looked. In 2009, the salary was 84.6. So you can see the difference. We're actually less this year than what we paid in 2009 as salary. That was an interesting fact.
That's good.
Employees' retirement, this is the line, Dr. French, you were talking about. Anything that a salary, the 450,000, any salary you paid on 3.01, the benefits are automatically calculated on 3.02.
So Bart, if I could, I think Dr. French makes a good point here. If we're showing the 450,000 as an allocation, then the associated benefits for the 450,000 probably should be shown as well.
And they are. They're in this line. I mean, I didn't break them out for this specific dollar.
Right.
But they are included in these numbers.
Understood. Just for the sake of transparency, I
Right,
think
exactly.
breaking it out, I mean, I don't know if we want to amend the document, but just calling it out as an allocation.
Thank you. I agree. That's a good point.
Okay. Also on this line, the 600,000 we added, we've had this in here. We put it in there for this fiscal year, but we also, when we did this a year ago, we showed it in there. One of the reasons we added $600,000 is because we're not sure how many staff members we're going to have to hire for this affordable health care. Our evaluation period or testing period was October of last year, or November of last year through October of this year. And any staff member that we've used, any substitutes, basically, and our substitutes that we hire are transportation and food service. Any substitutes that we have on staff, or any staff member who works less than 30 hours. We've been tracking all those employees, and at the end of October, we'll go through and look at all those numbers. Anybody, based on the federal government for the Affordable Health Care Act, anybody who has averaged 30 hours or more over that year, we by law have to offer them insurance. I'm kind of estimating that as far as we have 125 bus drivers, I'm assuming we're going to see about 20 drivers, probably, because they're hard to find. We're going to find probably at least 20 drivers that we're going to have, plus food service. We're going to have to hire some people, or not hire, but we're going to have to offer them insurance. And when you figure your premiums are about $15,000 a year times 20 to 25, you're going to be close to that number. That it's going to add to our costs for insurance purposes. So plus there's fees in there. We pay a fee to the federal government to be part of this process. You know, if we another part of the Affordable Health Care Act is the affordability part of it. And first of all, we got to identify who's working more than 30 hours, but once they work more than 30 hours, if our health insurance plan is too expensive for them, they're allowed to go to the exchange, and when they do that, we pay a penalty because we didn't make it affordable. So we allocated $600,000 on the 5-year forecast to cover what those costs may be. In other words, at the end of this year, if it comes down to where we only need $400,000, okay, we can put 400 and maybe go from there. But right now, we just don't know what all that's going to be because this is the first year of the process.
Now, our teacher subs, we do not, with the ESC, we do not have to worry about.
That's correct. At this point, it's our understanding that the ESC, the Franklin County Educational Service Center, we purchased all of our teaching subs through them. Mm-hmm. Also, all of our custodians are through them. They're being told that, actually, let me back up. If we hire them here, we're told that, let's say teachers don't work over the summer. We take everything that they've done in time and divide it by 9. We can't say, well, they didn't work over the summer, it reduces them. From our understanding, the ESC is being told that because they're not really a school district and council of governments instead, they don't have to count the summer months. So of all the substitutes, if they're averaging 30 hours or whatever the time they're going to do, they're going to divide by 9, or by 12, not 9. And so when they did their initial calculations, originally, we would have had to hire almost 50 substitutes on our insurance plan, but because they're a council of government, they're saying you might have 1, maybe. So there's an advantage to have them hire our substitutes is because of that rule. Now, if I look at that as a loophole, that may get changed in the future.
Yeah.
But for right now, it's a loophole.
And we're balancing off the cost that it cost us to do the hiring versus what we're saving.
Right. Well, we pay them a 4%. Whatever the teacher
Yeah.
costs, we pay them 4%.
So at this point, we're farther ahead using them still.
We are.
Okay. And so we're doing it with the custodians, but we decided not to with the bus drivers because it's so
won't.
difficult.
The Franklin County, because of the liability, they will not hire your subs. You have to do it. So we hire them directly here.
Okay,
So that's where the $600,000 comes from.
thank you.
Next is purchase services. Nothing major there. We estimate roughly a 1.5% increase each fiscal year. That's roughly $276,000 a year. That's pretty much all we're assuming in here. Supplies and materials. Again, we're assuming a 3% increase in here each year. Pretty much goes across all 5 years of the forecast. Capital outlay. Capital outlay, if you look in 2014, let me give the audience their numbers here. 2014 is, I think, right there. Yeah. It says 963,000, I think. I can't read it sideways, but I think that's what it says on yours. and on here, it's 963,000. The reason it jumps in 2015, when we did a technology plan last year, we had it in the forecast for $1 million that we were going to allocate. We never appropriated it, but we allocated it, and we said if there's a plan in place, then we would appropriate it. Well, they put a plan in place late in the year, and so what we did is, because that technology plan included that $1 million last year, we brought it forward. So whatever they didn't spend last year, we brought it forward because they needed that. That's how they did the plan, was based on all that $1 million each year. So the reason you see an increase to $2.9 million is from 963 is because really that's 2 years of almost 2 years of technology money in there. And so then you can see that it goes back in fiscal year 16, it goes back to 1.7 in 16 and beyond. So that's the reason you see the difference on that line, is because of that technology plan. Other objects, this is, again, what we pay the Franklin County Educational Service Center, any Delaware County auditors' fees. We pay roughly 2% to the county auditors for the collection of our taxes. They charge us roughly 2%. Any win-win, one of the things that's went up this year, if you remember a couple years ago, there was a win-win adjustment. We got some refunds for about a year and a half. Going forward, we don't have that refund anymore, so it basically went up $311,000 of that increase. Of that, really $500,000 is the win-win portion of that. Transfers out. Transfers out, we basically have three things. One of the things we did each year, we started a year ago, we basically transfer any 009, which is uniform school. If we have kids that are on free and reduced lunch that we can't charge fees for, we transfer money from the general fund and put it into that uniform school fund 009. So we transfer money into that fund from the general fund. We also transfer, we created a fund in the capital improvement, the 003 fund. It was basically a field turf replacement fund. When we lease out those fields, that money goes into that 003 fund to try to offset future costs of this fund. Well, we don't have enough operations, or I guess outside businesses, using that. So at some point, the board's going to have to replace those turfs on those three fields. So what we started to do was to allocate $65,000 each year that we transfer from the general fund that goes into that turf fund each year. One of the reasons part of the $65,000 is we were spending money to line the fields, cut the fields, do whatever anyway. Mr. LaRose and I tried to figure out what that cost was per year, and that's sort of part of the 65. If you hadn't put turf in it, you'd have been paying for that anyway. So what we were trying to do is, over the course of 12 years, have enough money in that fund so that whoever's sitting in this seat has the money to be paying for it. Otherwise, you guys are going to go, well, why didn't we plan ahead and put money in that account? So we arbitrarily put $65,000 there. The board wants to put 30 or 130. We can do whatever the board wants to do. We were just trying to make sure that in 10 to 12 years, we have enough money in that 003 fund, which is a capital fund that we're transferring from the general fund into the capital fund for future use to replace the fields when we need to.
And that was based on, and this is just not a shot in the dark, that was based on an intelligence estimate from what was being spent on caring for the fields.
And it wasn't a lot. I think when Jeff Rose and I figured it's somewhere around 20 to 25,000 a year. It wasn't a lot of money.
Right.
But if you just put that kind of money in there, you're not going to have enough to replace the fields in 10 to 12 years. So I think Mr. Rose thought it was around $400,000 to $500,000 per field to replace that at the time, in 12 years from now. And so we were just trying to make sure. So if we get this funded, in 10, 8, 9 years, you can certainly stop it. It's just that right now we're trying to allocate some semblance of something that goes into that fund to plan for the future.
Yeah, I was going to say, this board in 10 to 12 years may decide to rip up that turf and
Well,
forget it. So who knows?
I wouldn't recommend that, but you could.
Well, I don't know. There's some studies both ways.
Okay, but anyway, that's the reason for the what we're transferring into the to the transfers out are the 009 fees, and the turf replacement fields. And also we transfer bond retirement money out of there. When we have money that we're paying for the 002 bond retirement, we transfer money from the general fund into the bond retirement fund to pay our bonds. So those are the three things we're transferring out.
Could I ask you a question about the auditor's 2% cost to collect our taxes? Is that true with all school districts they have across the board?
I think they're pretty close to 2%.
Percentage of 2%, okay.
And one of the things that the auditors did do this last year, I think we got a check in, might have been July, every 3 years, we go through a reappraisal, and they bill us even more for that because they have to pay
Yeah.
people to go out and inspect the properties. And I don't have it in front of me, but I think we got a check from them about $300,000 or $400,000 this summer as a refund because it didn't cost them as much as what they thought they were going to do. So we've gotten one from Delaware County and Franklin County for the last reappraisal. But that's an additional, that's above and beyond your 2%.
Yeah.
Okay. This sheet here basically just shows what was forecasted in May 28, 2014 versus what's forecasted now. Again, keep in mind, that's what was projected, forecasted. Those numbers there are not actual. So when you look at the forecast, they're not going to be the same. That's what was projected on that date. The revenue overview, again, is just a summary. This new formula generates, or is projected to generate roughly $32 million over the course of the 5-year forecast. The cap, again, we know what it did last year and this year. Hopefully in May, the state will come out with their new formula and increase it or keep it the same or change it, whatever. We don't know what they're going to do. We're anticipating a 1.5% cap. In this forecast, I've showed you that the emergency levy is expected to provide the full 5-year life cycle, which will need to be renewed if the board so chooses. It needs to be renewed in calendar year 17. Otherwise, you stop collecting it as of January of 2018. So if a decision is made to renew it, you really need to start in the fall of 16 to start that process. Without the levy renewal, see if I'm going to sneak ahead for a second here someplace. Without the levy renewal, I always look at line, let's see, get my pointer. For you guys, it's the green line over here, and for us, it's the green line here. One of the things that's always a true test of what we're doing, it tells you how much you're either spending or collecting, or how much you're actually receiving more than you're spending. So in fiscal year 15, we're actually receiving $21.1 million more than we're bringing in. In fiscal year 16, you're spending $14 million. In 17, you're spending $8 million. In 18, you're actually spending $6.8 million more than you're bringing in. And in 19, you're spending $21.1 million. Now, that's without the levy. Okay? So let me, actually, I jumped ahead. Let me go back here for a second to the revenue overview. Revenue overview, again, we think the state's going to do 1.5%. The emergency levy needs, in my opinion, should be renewed. The expenditure overview, again, staffing increases. We're allocating an additional $450,000 for new staffing each year. It's an allocation. It's not in appropriations. It's just part of the forecast in case you need it. We've allocated it. Health insurance premiums, again, we put in 5.1%, and it's projected to be at 10% in each of the next 4 years. And I will share with you one of the things we negotiated in our classified negotiations. We have an opener in there that if premiums are more than 10%, there's a reopener in there, because we were concerned. We didn't know what the affordable health care was going to do over the next 4 years. So they agreed to let us have an out, if something tragic happens or they change some rule that we don't know what's out there. But we do have a 10% in there each of the 4 years. Again, purchase $600,000 for additional health insurance is in there, and the purchase services pretty much what they've been for the last 2 years. An interesting topic that is different this year is the budget reserve part of this process. In the past, when I first came here, we didn't have a budget reserve because we really didn't have any money that we could put in it. A year ago, we had a discussion, and we actually put in a 30-day cash balance in the 5-year forecast, which I think was the equivalent, well, we put $13 million in there last year. There was some discussion this year, some of the board members and Dr. French, that maybe we should put more. So what I did is I created a chart on the bottom. You can see what a 30-day cash balance is equal to 8.3%, 45-day and 60-day. And you can see what those numbers, it's based on the expenditures per year. So it's kind of a moving target. What we did in here, we actually just added $6 million to the 13, which is roughly a 45-day carryover amount, and we increased it to $19 million for the budget reserve. So, and again, that's what we'll submit tomorrow. The board approves this. It can be changed at any time. It's not a board policy, so it really can be changed at any time. It's an allocation that we have. Well, I don't have it. This isn't the forecast. I just gave you numbers of what a 30, 45, and 60-day cash balance would be. I'll show you the number here in a minute. We just added, basically, Carol, Dr. French, for years under 2017, you can see it's 19.5 million on a
Right.
45-day, and it's 18.6 in 16 and 17.9. We sort of just wanted one number there as an ease of operations, so we just put 19 million in there total.
Okay.
It's kind of an average through there. So we put that in there. It doesn't obligate you to keep it in there. It's there as an allocation. If in May you guys tell me you don't want it in there or you want more in there, it can be changed at any time. It's just we've allocated it in here for now. Okay? This is kind of a summary, and I know it's kind of hard to see. You guys have it in front of you. You can see on line 9.03 for you guys, which is this line here, you can see where that $19 million is right here. For you guys, it's this line over here. You can see it was 13 million in 14, and we changed it to 19 going forward. You can kind of see as a summary at the top here, you can see that we have 152 million in financing sources. We're spending 173, which is for you guys, this line right there. We're actually spending $21.1 million more than we're bringing in 19. So cash balance wise, we're actually still in 19 going to have a $38.4 million cash balance, including that 19 million. So if you say, well, I don't want to include the 19 million, okay, fine. We've got a $58 million cash balance. Okay. And then the bottom line, you can say, well, what happens if the levy passes and we put it back in? That's what this number down here is on the bottom. You can see that we'd have $63.3 million if the levy is renewed in 17. So it's kind of a summary sheet of what the forecast looks like. I just pulled bits and pieces of the lines out. This one I know you're not going to be able to see, but this is kind of the 5-year forecast. You guys can see it up here, and if the audience prints this, they can see it as well. It's just what each of the lines show on the 5-year forecast. It shows everything that I summarized. This just has all the other bits and pieces and parts in it, so there's nothing different on there. One of the things I will share, which I'm looking up here, well, you guys can't see it anyway, but if I were to take these two lines over here, the salary and benefits, those two lines right there, it's line 3.01 and 3.02. In 2012, that was worth 83% of our costs. Mm-hmm. Salaries and benefits was 83% of our expenditures. This year, it's 76%. So, and I know from I had another person ask a question about that. That's not including the subs that we pay from the ESC.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That
so really,
takes away the
if you added that $8 million back in there, and I didn't do that, you might be at 78 or 79 somewhere in there. But just apples to apples, I tried to keep those numbers there. So it's interesting. I mean, I think we're doing a good job of monitoring those costs.
That is good. Yeah.
I think.
One of the things that happened that, of course, that helped that was that we had a great deal of our more experienced teachers retired in the last couple of years. So that made a big difference in the, and we hired
younger teachers.
Younger teachers, yeah.
Right. And if you ask, I've been asked, well, how many teachers you think are going to retire this year? We don't know. We don't have them in this forecast. And one of the reasons we don't have them in here is if you put them in here as going away this year, then you got to put them in as going out or new teachers coming in. It's kind of a wash for the first 2 or 3 years. So it would just been more confusing to do it that way. So if we have 100 teachers leave, it'll blow this up for the first year or two. But then after that next year or two, because you have a younger staff coming in, it'll offset. So they're not in this report. We do have just so you guys know, on the 8th of November 18th, Mr. Smetzer and I are going to do, we're hosting a STRS retirement informational series. It's going to be at Central High School in the auditorium. We have STRS coming in to talk with the teachers for the first hour, and then Mr. Smetzer and I will be there the next hour trying to talk about timelines of what we need to do, what we need to happen. So it'd be interesting to see how many teachers we have show up for that for informational basis. We are expecting a large group of staff members to retire this year just because STRS is changing their rules. So it'll give us some kind of an indication, hopefully, of how many staff members we have at that meeting. So we're trying to be proactive for this group. Oh, well, we didn't talk about this one. This is just the financial stability, this graph you guys have up here. If we plug $19 million in, you can see what our ending cash balance is. In fiscal year 15 is the light blue, fiscal year 16 is the dark blue. So even with the $19 million cash balance, we're fine. This just gives you a general fund revenue. It shows you 63% is coming from real estate, 2% from tangible personal property. The state foundation is roughly 23%, and you can see the other allocations on the bottom. This is revenue. Expenditure side, again, 57% is salaries, 20% benefits, and then you see the purchase services are 13 and so forth. And that was it. I'm trying to make sure I answered all of the person's questions. We had the turf. The only thing I didn't answer was the Google accounts, and that's going to be Dr. Kellogg's answer. The casino money we answered, the FTE, I think I got them all. Okay. So that's kind of where we are for the forecast. It's a good forecast. It's a conservative. Again, we only have 1.5% from the state, and we assume their number, basic aid number of $5,800, which they haven't changed. If they add money to that as well as raise the cap, then that's even going to be more better. So we just don't know what they're going to do. I mean, we have 7 months left of the state budget. We're hopeful that they'll be, and if they are more generous, then our forecast will look even better. And I didn't really talk about as much as I wanted, but the forecast shows that the levy actually not, we can't show that being passed in 17. At some point, the board has to talk about that. As far as I'm concerned, I would recommend that you renew that, mainly for the state reason, for the homestead rollback portion of that money, plus the stability. And if you remember when we originally passed that, we said it would last 3 years. It's really going to last, was it 8, 9, something like that? So, I mean, the board's done a good job of managing that, but it needs to be renewed. It's a lot of money. And, I don't want somebody to say, well, gosh, it's $16 million. You've got a nice balance. You don't need my $16 million. Well, yes, we do, because otherwise we're going to come back to you within a year or two, because you can see how much we're spending more than is coming in. So we do need that levy renewed. So I'll get off my soapbox for a minute. Any other questions that I missed or that I didn't?
A couple comments. I never like to hear we're spending more than it's coming in, but there comes a time maybe when we end up doing that, which is not good. But the good part is that at least we have a budget reserve now, and that was started a year or so ago, and we've added to it in this proposal here, if the board votes for this. My feeling is that you treat this like a budget of your own. It's like your own, checkbook. Naturally, you're trying to save a little portion for emergencies, and that's really what we're trying to do, because you never know when there's going to be an emergency in the district, and we only at this point would have 45 days, ahead. So that's not a lot, but at least it's a beginning, and that's a plus.
Well, and I know from Dr. French and talking with some of the other board members, one of the reasons we also have a lot of capital needs out there too.
Yes.
And so by not putting all that, I know you'd wanted 60 days in there, but by not putting all that in there, that does allow money that you could set aside for capital needs somewhere else. So if you remember when the board passed that bond issue a few years ago, they reduced it by quite a bit of what they wanted to do. So Mr. LaRose has been trying to Band-Aid things along. And so one of the things that will allow us to do is to put a plan together to use that for some of capital expenditures as well.
I understand that, yeah.
Any other questions?
A couple of points I do want to reiterate, not only the budget reserve, but the forecast itself. You may indeed see changes as the board has discussions, particularly as regards the forecast itself. In upcoming months, I anticipate that the board will be having some discussions about shifting some allocations as we discuss the capital plan and also as we discuss program. So what you may see, it's the little dude with, the pointed hat and the telescope there. This is a forecast. This is allocating sums into various chunks, but this is not cast in stone. So anticipate some upcoming discussions, anticipate where those may be going. The board may choose to change the allocations, the board may choose not to, but the capacity to do that is inherent within what this document is. As regards the budget reserve, it's also important to note that the board can choose to move that money at will, and that is, as Bart said, not a policy decision. So there are, I don't want anyone to walk away from what is an excellent presentation, Bart, and thank you for the way you do the presentation, with the idea that this is cement. It is not. It is much more like gel, if you will, in a lot of ways. And I do think, by the way, it's also extremely important to be conservative around what the state may choose to do. Districts in the past that have not been as conservative about what they thought the state would allocate have been burned pretty badly. So we try not to put ourselves in that kind of risky position. Anything else anyone would like to add?
No comments at this point. No.
I got one more. I'm on my soapbox, Bart. A point of caution. I like the good numbers that we see in a lot of places in this document. But every time we look at the good numbers, we have to also focus on the balancing act that is required between the numbers that we have and the program that we need. So when we talk about personnel is 83%, and personnel is now at 76%. On the one hand, that can seem to be a very positive percentage. On the other hand, we have to look at what that plays out to be within the schools. So when we look at balancing, we have to balance the level of experience and inexperience. We have to balance how many teachers, classified staff, administrative staff, how many people choose to leave, and why we are hiring at different levels. So it's never a good idea to look at something like this through only one lens. It's extremely important to look at the balance overall for the program itself. Now, that's my soapbox, Bart.
That's fine.
And you know what, I will add to that, I think we are there. I think we have a balance. We have a number of beginning teachers, we have a number of experienced teachers, and we are going and adding new programs. I know we're probably not adding them fast enough. Yeah, slowly. But we have to take it slow so that we do a good job with the ones we do add, and we try them, and they do work out. And this group really moved pretty fast with this pathways thing.
Oh, state money.
You know, amazingly. And so I think, you know, we're getting there. We are taking it slow, you're right. But I think we need some more things maybe at the middle school level for the students, because we don't want them with 2 study halls, certainly, and that's always been an issue. But we have to do it at a pace that the taxpayers can afford, and that we don't keep adding a number, because every time we add a person, we add their benefits of 16%, which we can't forget. And so, you know, the expense keeps growing, and so we want to do what we can do for the students. Naturally, that's our goal. That's what we're here for. I think basically we've done a pretty darn good job overall, and Dr. Kellogg's been here just a little over a year, and lots has happened, so I'm optimistic, so thanks.
One of the, don't forget, so go back 2 weeks to the balanced scorecard, right? The bottom one, financial resources line to, so you're all on the same page about what are the programming we need, what's going to be most beneficial for kids, what can we afford long-term, what can we sustain, what's aligned with the strategic plan, the comments from the community. And then that's when I think how you use the resources you have starts to communicate priorities and build trust. So we'll keep that document in mind as we move along.
I just think it's very, I'm sorry. I just think it's really very helpful. I just want to commend you. Thank you. Just really very helpful in the way you present this and then break down certain categories. It's, you know, I consider myself still new, trying to get more deeply into the numbers. I think this forecast is just very helpful. And periodically when you call it a soapbox, but when you step out and say, you know, this is just kind of my recommendation, that's just very helpful, whether we kind of follow that path or not. I think the reserve forecasting, I mean, it's just really good. I want to commend the previous board and folks that stepped out on a limb back then and said we really got to set some things aside. But I'd also urge a little bit of caution on if we hold so much in reserve, and there's just a real significant need for some technology and some updating in our middle and high. I would say all the way through. Personally, I'd say all the way through. So it's just a tremendous balance, and The last thing, it's too long. The folks that did the Pathways update, I don't know if how many you caught, several of them said thank you to us, said thank you for that, thank you. Really, I would deflect that back to the thank you for the community. We don't always see eye to eye on the speed of things and how it all unfolds, but it's really the community out there that is funding it and supporting it, and when they see teachers and students get excited and they're learning and developing a hope, even if they don't go on to college. Sorry, this is leaking into board comments. I just think the way that this has been done and the balance we're trying to strike in developing excellence, not beyond our means, but right at our means. Job well done.
One superintendent observation in this. I go to 18 and 19, where we show our first deficit, where we're spending more than we're bringing in. But in 18, that's really a function of the renewal rolling off. So we show a $6 million deficit in terms of, right?
With the levy there, you'd still be $2 million to the good.
And in the second year, where we show we're 21 million in the hole, that's 2 years, which is 16.6 million.
Right.
So it's really, as Bart's talking about the renewal of that emergency levy, the gap between expenditures and revenues is a function of losing revenue, voted revenue, more so than it is how we're spending the dollars. So that's where I think that conversation with the board and the community as we start heading in that direction about where we're going to be. And then the in-between point is how do, on my end of the equation, and working with Bart and our staff, how do we keep the numbers the kind of direction we're going, where you're seeing, if you look through this, almost every place where there's revenue, the way Bart's done things, you're seeing increases, projected increases in revenues above what we had seen. And on the expenditure side, you're continuing to see expenditures coming in less than we had anticipated. So the two ends of the spectrum are going in the right direction to put us in a better position even with this forecast in 18 and 19. So that's what we're projecting forward. And I appreciate the work he does. He keeps me in line, and we're getting it done the right way.
All right. Any other comments before we call the roll? The roll, please.
Mr. Velardo, excuse me.
Yes.
Dr. French?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes, the 5-year forecast has been approved.